Good morning,
Good morning.
Rafaela Crevoshay.
Crevoshay.
Crevoshay. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to explain exactly what you're an expert in. You're going to do that for yourself because
Okay.
you know how, all the verbiage of the long words, and that's not my thing. But the general topic today is crops, understanding agriculture, the challenges we're facing as a world when it comes to food, growing it versus not.
Yeah,
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, a little bit yourself and
sure.
your expertise.
Well, I was trained as a horticulturist. I went to the University of Wisconsin and studied horticulture with an emphasis in international agriculture. And I've worked in a variety of agricultural positions, mostly in the United States, but in some other remote locations. But in general, my focus remains on the plant side of agriculture. There's an entire sector of agriculture that deals with animals. I know very little about that. It's not my area of expertise.
Right.
But I have been qualified as a certified professional horticulturist by the American Society of Horticultural Science and as a professional agronomist by the American Society of Agronomy. And I got there through my certification as a certified crop advisor. And I've held that title for 5 or 6 years at this point.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, it means that I have been vetted. I passed an all-day exam.
No, absolutely. But what do you actually do? Like technically speaking?
What I actually do is it enables me to consult and advise farmers on their crops, crop management, crop choices, all of that sort of thing.
At what scale? Commercial scale, small farm?
At any scale. And as a matter of fact, I've taken a certain turn of my path. I started out working with commercial farmers. In fact, I still am involved in a commercial project growing organic heirloom tomatoes. We have a farm in Baja California, my partner and I. We've been doing that for 15 years. That's commercial. That's all for export to the USA. And it's obviously viable because we've been successfully staying in business for 15 years, which is a tricky thing to do in agriculture, especially in the import field. Okay, but beyond that, I have shifted my focus a little bit. I got involved with a gardening group in Chicago. Now, they called me. They had a problem. All of their clients got bad soil. They got bad soil from their supplier. Bad soil means all their plants died. It was a disaster. And they asked me to take a look at it, and I investigated their soil source and discovered that the ingredients were not suitable for what they were using. Obviously, they weren't suitable. But I told them, look, what you need to do is just use the compost that you were using. They had very good compost from an excellent source. So she did it. I said, just fill your beds. These gardeners are using, as many gardeners are nowadays, using raised beds. And so I said, just fill your beds with this stuff, and let's hope for the best. And she had me. I visited her a few months later, early in the summer, and had my fingers crossed, and we went out and looked at her garden. It was fabulous.
Just from compost?
It was just compost.
So no artificial fertilizers?
Right, no artificial fertilizers at all. But let's be clear about what kind of compost, because there are all kinds of compost. There's kind of minimally beneficial compost, and there is kind of the Rolls Royce of compost.
What's the difference?
And the difference is that what we use is manure based. It's got a big component of cow manure in it, and it's thermophilic, and that needs to be explained. It means it's heat loving. Because the organic ingredients are assembled into long stacks that are about 8 feet wide and 8 to 10 feet high, and they're turned by huge machines that just go in and turn the inside out and the outside in. After once the compost is organized into one of these stacks, it only takes a couple of days, not even 24 hours, before that starts to generate heat. That's where the thermophilic comes in, and that heat lasts for at least 3 weeks. And these are temperatures
3
above.
weeks?
Yes,
Really?
yeah, these are temperatures above 100.
In Chicago?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, not only
What?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this goes on all winter. It reaches 140 degrees, and
Wow.
I could show you photos
How though?
of these because there are thermophilic bacteria that are activated, and they just release all this heat. And the compost turners go through them every 2-3 days, turn the insides out, the outsides in, so everything is treated thermophilically. And the result after 3 weeks is you get this beautiful, sweet smelling, really lovely. I mean, it starts out as a pile of
Dung.
dung. It's I mean, just yeah.
I get it.
Cut to the chase. It's dung, and it smells like dung.
Yeah.
But once it's finished, it smells lovely. It smells like the forest floor.
Yes.
And it's flecked with these bacteria that are present throughout.
Right.
So it looks like it kind of had some snowflakes on it too. But it covers the entire material.
And it's a 3 weeks process that makes it. It's finished in 3 weeks. So how long does it take?
It takes at least 3 weeks.
At least.
Some composters let it go longer. It doesn't matter. You can let it go if you want it. Mm-hmm. But that's the big, and that's the standard as defined by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. They have looked at it and they certify this is the way to make compost. And much compost that's made in the U.S. is not thermophilic. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it doesn't have this quality. It just doesn't.
The quality of what? Nutrients?
The quality of nutrients, and it's not just the nutrients, it's the availability of nutrients to the plant roots. This is a key. So all of that manure, which is very rich in nutrients, is converted to an available form of nutrients. And more significantly, this is stable in terms of carbon. We've interfered with the release of carbon into the atmosphere. We're dealing with something that's well managed in ecological terms. So that's a big plus.
So what was the issue? The issue for the general corporate America is the speed. Is that what it is? The way they're producing is faster than the natural way of composting?
Well,
why aren't they going towards the natural way of doing it? That's the question.
I'm not sure where you're going with the corporate America,
like the general, the big farmers basically, right?
The big farmers aren't using it as they should.
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Okay. We have a long ways to go. We have the beginnings of a revolution going on in agriculture.
Which is going where?
And that's about the regenerative agriculture trend. Now, regenerative agriculture is something that's just at its inception in the U.S. It's only about 20 years since the first farmers started using it, and there were very few. There's still very few. There's about 1%, maybe 2% of American farmers. We could talk about the global perspective too. But in terms of America, it's a very small amount. And what it is a way of restoring soil to its to top condition. Now, this is revolutionary because it involves a process that basically changes 10,000 years of agricultural history. This is something different. Now, what I mean by that is farmers typically, globally, every spring go out and they plow their fields. This forbids you to do that. It's called no-till. You can't till your fields anymore. Why? Because tillage interferes with the life of the microbes in the soil. And those microbes are primarily bacteria and fungi. So why do we want to stop that practice? Why do we want to change over? Well, the metaphor is forests. In forest soils, and in a mature forest, it's at least a few hundred years old. There are vast networks of mycelial fungal threads throughout of all kinds of fungi throughout the forest soils. Now, these forests have grown magnificently, and they've done it without fertilizers, without pesticides. How have they done it? Well, these mycelial networks contribute something unique and very special. It's called ecosystem services, and it allows nutrients to be transferred from one tree to another, to be accessed from soil that wouldn't otherwise be accessed and delivered to the plants. It has disease preventing and disease resistant properties. All kinds of things are going on in the forest. So what we're trying to do is approach that model. Now, it's probably not going to be possible or practical to duplicate it in the agricultural soils, but to the extent that we can simulate that, we can have a big gain, and that will be a revolution in agriculture. Something that, the 10,000 years mark is not an exaggeration, because as long as we've been doing agriculture, we've been plowing up the soil every spring. Just go out and look at it this spring. Go out to an agricultural land. You'll see that this is still happening, and it's still happening in dominant numbers in the world. So that's number one. We want to stop no-till. The second rule of, I guess you could call it a rule of regenerative farming, is keeping the soil covered with something alive at all times. Now, that's not practical for everybody all the time, but it can be done, and it can be done by using for the interstitial spaces of planting, the places between your row crops. You can plant what we call cover crops. Cover crops include hundreds, probably thousands, of choices of crops that are not necessarily food crops. They're things like clover and alfalfa and buckwheat. And many others can be mixed together and planted as cover crops, and that keeps the soil protected. It protects it from erosion. It's always adding organic matter, which is extremely important. The organic matter component has been neglected by our farmers in general, so it addresses that. Okay, and then the third item that's critical to regenerative farming is biodiversity, and that is planting as diverse a crop as you can, and that can be accomplished for example, if you're just growing corn, you can just grow your corn as long as you put a diverse mix of cover crop in the open spaces. That will make the difference. Or you can. There's other things you can do, and that we ought to do to end this monopoly of monoculture, which is the planting of one crop. And if you go out to Minnesota or Iowa or Wisconsin in the summer, you'll see vast expanses of just corn or just soybeans for miles and miles, and nothing's breaking it. Nothing is interrupting it. This is called monoculture, and that is its time has come. We need to terminate monoculture and implement biodiversity. So that's basically the essence of the regenerative program are those three items. There are a lot of kind of secondary practices that are appropriate, but those are the basics.
Mm-hmm. What is the cost?
Oh, the cost. That's a good question.
Because I'm wondering why they're not just moving towards regenerative.
Right. That's a good question too. Well, why? Well, the cost. There was a study done by the Soil Health Institute, which is it's an excellent organization that does research on soil issues, and they've done a lot of work with regenerative. And they did a study on regenerative farmers. These are farmers who had been doing it for at least 5 years, some as much as 20 years. And they did an analysis, and what they discovered was that these farmers had a major reduction in costs. They produced about the same yield. They didn't really sacrifice anything on yield, but their costs of fertilizer, for toxic pesticides, all dropped. It just as though the bottom fell out of it. And they're making much more money. Their soil is healthy now, whereas the control group couldn't say that. So there's the proof that the economics are there to support.
Does it require more labor than traditional?
No, it doesn't. It requires probably the same or less. You know, there may be for some crops at least fewer passes through the field. You know, a pass is when you take this heavy machinery and you go through your field. Well, that's an expense.
So what would be their argument towards, if you had a conversation with one of those who are still doing monoculture, agriculture, what would be their argument?
Well, the argument number one is you're losing your soil. You're damaging your soil.
Right. But what are they saying? Why are they keeping to the original?
They are in a mode of inertia, but it is starting to shift right now. But generally, they're highly influenced by their vendors. Mm-hmm. Their vendors are huge agricultural companies that sell their seeds, their pesticides, their herbicides.
Got it.
You know, all that stuff.
That makes sense.
So they're under the spell of those institutions.
I have a question for you. You know, San Diego. You've been here for 35 years.
Yeah.
It is the biggest small farms in the country.
The biggest small farms?
Yes, the most amount of small farms in the country is in San Diego.
Yeah.
Do you think that in general the population should go towards more trying to grow as much as they can, small scale in their backyard, this type of thing? Or are you thinking it's not possible?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to get back to the gardening job that I talked about in Chicago. That led to putting together a new protocol for home gardeners, and we're working on a book that we hope to publish pretty soon that explains that. And it's basically the equivalent of what I just talked about for farms, but it's adapted to the home garden. Now, there are 50 million home gardeners in the U.S. 50 million. This is not trivial. And that's not a firm number. We don't know if the number is really 70 million or 40 million. I don't know, but it's a lot. There's a lot of farmers. There's a lot of gardeners in this country. And we have to look back to World War II to see an example of when those farmers were truly mobilized, and they were mobilized during World War II as the victory gardens. And there were so many, with all of the male population abroad in the military at that time, it was families and a lot of women who were doing this work, and they produced about 35% of the produce consumed in the country. That's not insignificant. That's a big deal. Now, we could get back to that, and there's reason for us to get back to it. The environmental crisis that we're in with climate change justifies it. The nutritional quality of the food that we get from our supermarkets justifies it. It's not, if you go into a supermarket, you'll see beautiful displays of all kinds of fruits and vegetables. It's great. It's very impressive, but it's just a fraction of what's available, of what you could grow yourself. And the quality is adequate, but it's not the top nutritional echelon that's available. For example, we grow tomatoes. We grow tomatoes in Mexico, in Baja California. They're organic. They're shipped by truck to the market. It takes, from the time of picking to their arrival at market destination, and by market I mean a supermarket, it's probably 2 weeks. So we have to pick those tomatoes kind of on the green side. We have to. It's okay. They ripen up. They ripen up, and they're tasty, they're delicious, and they're nutritious up to a point. But by the time the consumer gets that, it's 2 weeks plus a few days. It's almost 3 weeks. Now, let's compare that to growing a tomato in your home garden. You go out, you let them ripen on the vine, and you pick it, and you can eat it within 15 minutes. Now, the clock is ticking on the nutrition side of the equation. So the difference between 15 minutes and 3 weeks is huge, and the nutrition does decline. So that's another thing that we were addressing with the home gardeners, and this is our emphasis, is to educate and hopefully organize home gardeners to shift to this procedure, get away from their standard reliance on commercial fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides and all of that junk.
Mm-hmm. So you would recommend to the average citizen and family to grow their own?
Absolutely.
100%.
If you've got enough sun, if you've got enough space, you don't need much space.
Yeah.
And if you've got enough sun in your backyard, you need to be growing. You need to be growing.
Right.
And if everybody would do it, there would be such an abundance, and there would be an opportunity to share with neighbors. It would make a huge difference. It would have an impact on our national nutrition. It would have an impact on the diversity of foods that we eat. It would have an ecological impact on your backyard. It will attract bees and butterflies and hummingbirds and all kinds of things that you didn't anticipate. Right. And there are many other benefits too. It's just a win situation.
Right. Would you? Let me ask you a question. I was thinking about it. Let's say my community over here, okay, Del Cerro. I was thinking, why can't I know there are communities that do this already, where the different houses, neighbors grow different crops, and they kind of share. You have chickens, we have this, you have that. What do you think of that type of style of community building? Do you see there's a future in that at all, building communities like that?
Absolutely. This is the future. This is our future. And we have to accommodate that. We have to make time and space for it. And if it sounds challenging, it really isn't. People just need to recontemplate, reschedule their weekly routine and integrate this into it. Can be done.
So what's going on with our topsoil?
So what needs to be shouted from the rooftops is that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organizations, the FAO, issued a warning just a few years ago. It's about 3 years by now, saying that we have approximately 4 decades left before the global resources of healthy soil are depleted.
Right.
Now, if that's an accurate prediction, what are we going to do in 4 decades? We're going to be in deep trouble. This has happened before, but it's happened to specific civilizations that have depleted their own topsoil, and they've been terminated, and they've had to move on, or they just became impoverished, or they've lost their power. There are numerous examples of that throughout history. What's different now is we're talking about the entire world,
Right.
not just what happened in Sumer,
Right.
or in Mesopotamia.
Yes.
That was one thing, but this is global, everywhere. So we've got to make this shift. Now, regenerative farming will address this and will cure it. And by the way, a successful enterprise of regenerative farming globally will have a big impact on the climate because it will sequester carbon in a big way.
Mm-hmm. So regenerative includes crop rotations. Does it include the whole Shemitah concept? You know that here in the seventh year?
Shemitah is a Hebrew concept of leaving the land fallow every 7 years. That's a good concept, and somebody back when had a good idea and it was implemented. But there's more to Shemitah than just that. It shouldn't just be left fallow and bare. It should be planted with a cover crop or with some crop that you don't have to harvest it.
Right.
But you have to, in fact, you shouldn't harvest it. You should just let it develop. You can harvest it in the sense that you cut it down and allow it to become part of the soil. That is very restorative. The soil does need a rest. In fact, I would recommend doing it a lot more frequently than 7 years. You could do it every 3 or 4 years. And if you're gardening with raised beds, let's say you have 4 raised beds, which is not a big area, but it produces a lot of food. You could keep one of those raised beds as a fallow bed once a year and just keep rotating that through your system. So that bed could be planted to a cover crop, just allow the crop to terminate itself and become part of the soil, and then plant it again the following season with a productive crop.
I see. But what about planting? I mean, you're talking about raised beds. What about planting in the ground?
There's nothing wrong with planting in the ground. Some people prefer it. Some people just don't like raised beds or can't do it for one reason or another. There's a great example of that. There's a British gardener. His name is Charles Dowding. He uses this system, but he does it in the ground. He keeps his borders very well defined, so that there's no creep or overlap of his boundaries. But he's constantly filling those beds with new compost. Constantly, he'll do it even 2-3 times a year. And so at this point, they have the equivalent of 100% compost that his crops are growing in, and he gets fabulous results. So that's an option. We are offering a protocol that will guarantee success, but there's no rigidity to it. You can do it without raised beds. You can do it without the manure-based thermophilic compost. For example, there's a lot of compost being manufactured municipally nowadays, and that's a great thing. Cities are sending trucks around, and they're picking up organic waste from homes, and that's being made into compost. Now, it's not the highest quality compost. It doesn't contain manure, so it's got a little bit less punch to it, but it's made the same way, pretty much thermophilically, and the results are adequate. So that can be made too, and that's a very important contribution. It's an important change in the way we handle our organic waste. It wasn't that long ago, probably 20, 30 years ago, that everybody was just throwing their organic waste away, putting it in the landfill. Oh my God, what a waste. What a waste. Plus, that stuff generates greenhouse gases. But when you compost it,
What do you think of those machines right now that they're having at the homes? You know, the mill for the millie that composes all this compost.
It's good.
You like those?
It's
Or
good.
no?
They're kind of they're if the scale works for a home, okay, great. But I see those and I think, gee, it doesn't handle much material, but it's a positive move in the right direction. It indicates a change in consciousness, which is very important.
Yeah. How does this, again, going back to growing in the ground, aren't you worried about the neighbors, putting pesticides on their grass or all this stuff leaking into your garden?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well,
That's why you prefer raised beds?
the neighbors need to be educated.
Oh man, well, you're not going to change everybody right away.
No, but we can do that partially by example and partially by talking it through with them, and partially by applying pressure on the vendors to restrict making those toxins available to the general public. These are things that should not be in circulation. The worst, one of the worst offenders is glyphosate, also known as Roundup, which is used liberally without any consideration on a multitude of lawns. So there's not even an awareness that this chemical is out there, but it's used ubiquitously all over the country. Just spray Roundup. If you see someone spraying Roundup, you can talk to them and say, "Why are you doing that?" "Oh, I don't know. We're supposed to do that." It's just it's kind of a reflexive behavior, but it has health consequences, very serious,
Got it.
and ecological consequences.
Got it. Well, thank you. I think that was informative. Yeah. So we've settled. People should grow their own.
They should. They should. No, they should. We need to.
You think they can produce enough food?
Well, they can enough to make an impact. It won't. It
for
won't.
themselves.
Yeah, it'll make a big difference for them personally. They'll have food. They can have food. A significant portion of their diet year round can be grown by them.
There's so many people moving to buildings, to apartments.
That's tough. Well, there's a couple of possible solutions for that. One is community gardens.
Yeah, rooftops.
Rooftops is a possibility. That's a challenge, but it's been done successfully. So community gardens and rooftops are an option for that. Some apartments will have balconies that have enough sunshine to support some limited. You can grow things in what we call cloth bags. That's the new latest option for home planters. They're very good, and they can be put into ceramic pots. But in general, a lot of apartment dwellers will not be able to do this. But that's still okay if everybody else does do it. We still have 50 million gardens. Now, I've been working with an organization called Green America for the last couple of years. They have a division called the Climate Victory Gardens, and they've asked me to do webinars for them, and I've done webinars for them on this transformational gardening concept for the last 2 years. They have 25,000 members. Hey, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Compare that to 50 million. It's not even a drop in the bucket. It's not even a drop in the bucket. So we've got a long way to go. But we can get there. We can at least make a lot of
Yeah, I
progress.
mean, during COVID, I have a friend of mine in Canada who opened a greenhouse building company. He's making a lot of money selling greenhouses. I mean, that one through COVID, it just boomed.
Great.
It's just boomed worldwide. Yeah, I'm curious to see where this whole thing is going to lead with AI being implemented as well. Robotics and all that. That should be interesting, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, it's bound to have an impact.